Welcome to the War in Heaven. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm here along with Michael Hepworth. Today we are going to talk about force. And sometimes our inclinations or desires or actions that promote using law or the authority of an elected official to try and force people into a certain place, moral code, or belief system. And this harkens back, I guess, to us. To preface this a little bit, we see actions of the American people that lean towards the desire to use force more and more often. This is a concerning trend for us to look at. And in looking at the War in Heaven, we don't know everything about Satan's proposal, but Satan proposed to make it so that everybody was saved. That was his goal. He didn't like God's plan where some might be, some might not, depending on what those people chose. So everyone had a way. It wasn't a gamble in the sense of, it might work out for me. But it was, if you choose this, it's yours. But we might not all make the choice. And we might choose other things. And so therefore there was a chance that we wouldn't receive all that was possible under the plan presented by our Father in heaven. And so with this, Satan's plan proposed to take away the agency of humans and to force people to do what was right, so they all got the reward. And this aspect that took away agency, that used force to the extent it did, I guess to be fair, we don't fully know what his plan was to take away agency. But generally, if you think about taking away agency, it's going to involve some type of force or coercion, usually with it. And so there is the assumption that force was a part of it. And I think it's a pretty safe assumption. I get that some people may argue, I've heard some people argue about agency being taken through other means. But almost all of them, again, if you have a being that's alive, that can choose, that can do things, and then it can no longer make a decision, there's some element of force acting on it. And so just for purposes of this discussion, we'll move forward with the fact that taking away agency usually involves force or coercion. But one of the big downfalls to force is that no matter what you push or compel a human to do, or what you restrict or take away from them in terms of liberty or freedoms, you can never change their heart through force. And the American system we have, the Constitution, the Republic, all those things, it's actually tied deeply into the American heart. The American experiment, as some like to call it, was one that took law and it took the hearts of those here and tied them together. And so when the law comes out and creates force, it creates this very fascinating cycle. If we're going to force someone to try and believe something or force someone to try and accept something, the law comes in and starts to act on these hearts that are tied into the legal system, that are tied into the American government. And it pushes and pushes, and this creates hatred, this creates anger, this creates frustration. And those hearts then turn, because they're intertwined with the law, and they start to produce responses, often hate-based or fear-based or anger-based responses to the force they're feeling. And this is a piece that, as we look at what's happening currently in America, we start to see pieces of it playing out. And I guess before we go into the American side of things a little bit, to talk a little bit more about the tie that we have, that our hearts have to the law, since I don't think I talked as much about that in this episode. The American system is a balance. If you think about seesaw, we can have anarchy on one side, which is a state of no law, and there can be tyranny on the other side, which is a state of all law, where law makes all decisions. The Constitution tried to achieve a state balance between the two, where there was liberty. And to us, the state of liberty is we have enough laws to pull us out of anarchy, but as people, we keep a responsibility and a morality to undertake to govern ourselves to an extent, and our communities and those, associate with those around us in moral, just ways. And as we do that, if we do that on this side of the balance, the law doesn't have to come over here. We as a people are what creates the balance necessary. If we have law on one side, we, the people, balance it on the other side. And the representative form of government that was chosen takes it so that the people then choose representatives for the people who are then making laws over here. These representatives kind of serve to connect the people and the laws. And this makes it so that the things we want, things we desire, we're talking collectively as a nation, ultimately will come to be. The law will embrace all of our social norms and moral codes. And we can see the law do this if you look at American history. We went from places of slavery to places where racism was justified, to places where it was outlawed, to places where we didn't believe for a second in things like gay marriage and kick those people out of court seeking relief, to the point where we embrace them as a law and say, yes, you have a constitutional right to gay marriage. The laws and the interpretations of the constitutions have gone all over the place and back and forth, and they've followed societal morals. They followed our hearts. Again, talking collectively. There will definitely be a law you disagree with. But overall, as a society, if there's a law that's so repulsive to the social norm or the moral code, we will vote and put people in that specifically will change these things and amend these things. And so at some point in our representative society, the law is always reflecting back to us something about ourselves, something that we've acquiesced to, perhaps something that we want, but it's there. And it's interesting watching with the Trump coming back into office. He's here after 4 years of not being here. And in the 3 or so weeks since he's been in office, there's been just this flurry of executive orders, all kinds of decisions being made and pushed, as well as tariffs being imposed. And there's a lot of power currently that rests in the president. And this makes it so that as a people, some people look to that and say, oh, we can use the president position to accomplish a lot of what we want. We're going to skip this whole process, the representative process that's meant to help try and balance the hearts and the law, and just push towards one person. We want a solution and we want it now. We don't like the issues. And as I watch the executive orders fly and all the changes being made and the tariffs being imposed, these have significant consequences the world over. We can't just assume that we can lightly impose things, such as tariffs on Mexico, China, Canada, without it having impacts around the world. Many countries are reliant and tied into these systems, these economic systems. And I'm not saying that the tariffs should or shouldn't be there. I'm not saying they're right or wrong necessarily. What I'm saying is that when we give one person the power, we're starting to turn to force to solve our problems instead of turning to truth to solve our problems. And I very much believe that force will never solve our problems. It will only make them worse if that's the system we opt to use. It will come back to bite us hard. And so today we want to talk some about force, its relation, again, to the war in heaven, to our agency, and to our country here, because these are, to me, very important principles to understand and to discuss as we look at things. But Michael, curious if you have what thoughts you have as we start out our conversation today.
Yeah, quick note on force. Many times when we think of government entity or person imposing force, we look at it personally and we think we don't want force imposed on us. We want to be able to have some freedom to make choices. We tend to look at it differently depending on its impacts. If there is a very forceful law passed that reinforces something that you already do, there's usually not a lot of concern from individuals because they think, well, I already do this thing. It's not a big deal that the law is now making this happen everywhere. In fact, many people like that idea because then it puts in line all the people around them. They think, now I can force all these other people to do this thing that I think is really good. So we tend to have a different reaction on force based on if it benefits us, if it disadvantages us. And so, in speaking of our agency in the war in heaven and Satan's proposal to remove that, it can feel fine if you're living in a place where a bunch of people around you are making decisions that concern you. Maybe you don't feel safe. Maybe you don't feel like you have all the opportunities that you should have. And so somebody removing their ability to make choices feels good to you, but you don't want that imposed on you. And the problem we have with government is it's not a just choose the people who I want. It's everybody. So when we talk about force, you have to remember that if there's a tyrannical leader or somebody with a lot of power consolidated in their station, um, they will be able to impose force on those you want them to and also on you. And if somebody else enters into that position who doesn't think the way you think, that doesn't then remove their power to impose things by force. So force is it can seem attractive when you want things to happen a certain way and you feel that life would be better. But the problem is that it kind of burns from both ends. And so when we seek to force to make the world the way we want it to be, this is what we start to deal with. That it can go one way or the other at the drop of a hat. John Lennox once said that truth cannot be imposed by force, and I think that's due to the volatile nature of it. You can't one day have it working for you, and then the next day it might work against you, and there's just no way to stop it because the person that's enacting all the force has the power, and so they can turn against you or with you anytime they want. So it's just something to keep in mind with force. One of the reasons why we are concerned about that in law when we talk about the balance between anarchy and tyranny, that the more when you seek to impose that order, it's easy to go too far just based on actions around you. And I think we'll probably get into this discussion more, that we use the law to try to bring society out of anarchy to a more free place. But if society continues to make bad decisions regarding their freedom, the push to more and more towards tyranny gets easier and easier because people continue to make poor decisions and continue to try to force the issue of how do we create a society that where we can live together. The idea of force becomes a lot easier at that point.
Yeah, and it's one that, again, has been interesting in the American history because we've had so many different types of people here. America is a country that has a very diverse set of views and principles, and it's tried for many years to be a place where, um, the melting pot concept. It's tried to embrace and say, hey, you can come from wherever, you can have different ideas. We're trying to have a system where we can work together. But it is, I think, more and more as people become more entrenched in what they believe and they're digging their heels in and they're viewing other people as a threat to them and their way of life and whatnot, the notion of a melting pot is being challenged. I openly hear people talking about, well, let's exclude people, let's kick these certain types of people out. And there's some very concerning things that I watch happen when I forget who it was, Trump's pick for one of the positions dealing with immigration, when the Trump administration revoked the right of Venezuelans to be here who would come seeking asylum or refugee status from their country because of conditions there. Her statement was something along the lines of, I'm not quoting her exactly, but yeah, nobody wants these dirtbags here anyways. And I look at that and I think, that's awful. These are people. They came here appropriately. They came here seeking asylum, refugee status. They were granted it. And now we're just going to send them back to be put in prison there or whatever else happens. We look at kind of a lot of the hatred that comes towards different groups that stem out of certain things. And again, I tie this back to saying we're seeing that as Americans, we're starting to form an idea of a enemy, so to speak, someone that believes different than us, someone that speaks different, looks different, whatever it is that starts to take shape in our mind. And we start to push on that and force, the more authority we give to one person, the more that one person can carry that idea of force out. And again, you may have one person, you may have someone you trust so much, and you like George Washington, for example, and you say, "Hey, George, all of America trusts you. We're going to give you the keys to everything. Do whatever you want. We know you'll do the right thing." That may have been true with good old George. But what happens when the next president comes in and has access to all those same keys, has access to all that same power? And this is something that over time in America we build up. We've given the president the power over agency after agency after agency after agency. And so the president, when he comes in, he says, "Well, I'm going to fire all these people. I'm going to remake up the Constitution of the federal government." Um, and one person now wields a lot of power, which I think goes to the desperation when people, when they vote, they feel they've got to get one person through, so it's not the other person because there's so much power at stake and whatnot. But in the end, I think that one of the things we lose sight of is that still in America, the president doesn't have all the power. We shouldn't be giving the president more power. We should be returning to a place to say, what's my role in the check and balance process? Am I contributing to this? Because one of the most, I'd say, the most unattractive, maybe that's the way to say it, the most unattractive things about truth is that you can't impose it by force. Truth has to be heart to heart, person to person. We have to work to change hearts and change people for truth to be embraced. The law, when we come and say we're going to use our law to force people to do something, well, in our republic system, when the law comes and says to the people over here, you have to do this, and the people say, no, we don't want to do that, and they elect people to go change the law, there's this constant cycle back and forth. And the founders intended it to be that way. There was a check and balance on all types of things. But these laws are a reflection of us. And so ultimately, the force will create maybe a pendulum swing. It will create action where we then rise up and say, we're not going to do this anymore. We want to elect different people. But it's a dangerous thing. It's a very dangerous game to start playing, to believe that we can just go change hearts and minds by saying, nope, you don't get to be here, or good for you, you get the benefit of this, you don't, type thing. And this is one reason why socialism struggles. Frederick Bastiat in The Law said, once people know that they can just go vote the public coffers, then it's just a race to gather the most votes and take the money from the other people, type thing. And that's a fairly constant struggle that goes on in as we get more socialist as a country too. It's, oh, well, who gets these payments? Who gets those? Right now, Trump's cutting funding to all these groups and people in big, broad, fell swoops. And again, this is something that has ramifications the world over. I don't pretend that the government should be involved in everything it's involved in or should be giving money to everyone it is. There's plenty of issues with it. But I also don't pretend for a second that the process is invaluable to go through, to really work through this, and for the people to say, yeah, we want more accountability. Well, if you want more accountability on spending, don't just elect a president, elect reps that are committed to being fiscally responsible in what they approve for spending. It's still a reflection on us, who we elect, who we put through, and the things that we choose. But ultimately, the force side comes where we start to, in some ways, we want to have our own genie. If you think about Aladdin and the genie in the bottle, the more the force grows, the more power we give. Ultimately, if you think about, again, since law and human hearts are both on this balance in America, as we give the law more power and more power and more power, the the image of the genie becomes really interesting. In the show Aladdin, Jafar, the bad guy, so to speak, um, wanted all power, and he eventually got the lamp. He wished for all power, and once he was given all power, he became subject to the shackles of being a genie. And the most powerful being in the universe then gets put in a lamp and kicked into a cave for another 10,000 years or whatever it is. As Americans, it's the same. The more we give power, the more the shackles start to come on us. Because liberty, the only way liberty can exist is if we keep a personal responsibility for how we act and the things that we do. That's the only way. And so when we resort to a mechanism that says, yeah, force them to do what we want, force them to stop that, just one person, one person, one person, we're seeking to change the whole American system. And that's putting shackles on us pretty extensively because, whether or not you believe Trump can be in office for more than 4 years, he's pretty old. And at some point, he passes away and there's another. And who is that? And if we've given all this power and put all that power there, we're incredibly short-sighted. And those shackles click into place at any point. And so these are things that, to us, we have to remember that the nature of life itself is that we cannot give away our personal responsibility. Agency, life, entails that we take responsibility for our life and we don't hand it to someone else. We have to keep the responsibility for the things that we're responsible for and for our own moral code, our own ethics. And we should not be seeking to give that power to someone else to make those decisions for us. Michael, curious what thoughts you have.
I liked your thoughts about personal responsibility. I was reading in Jordan Peterson's book, We Who Wrestle with God. He was discussing the Israelites leaving of Egypt. Moses came and told Pharaoh to let them go, and he wouldn't. And then all the plagues came, so Pharaoh let the children of Israel go. And he points out in his book that the promise from Moses was, let's leave Egypt and let's go to a promised land, the land of Canaan that God has promised for us. So the children of Israel left Egypt and then entered the desert and then wandered around the desert for 40 years. And he found an interesting analogy in that, where in our own lives, when we haven't been taking proper responsibility for our actions or those around us, and we've let something that shouldn't dominate our lives, it's kind of become tyrannical. And we all have these things throughout our lives that they'll dominate our life at some point. We'll realize it. We have to try to sacrifice it to move on to something better, to become more free and more able to choose. When we let things dominate our lives, it kind of becomes the tyrant in our lives. And letting go of that can be tough, because many times the reason we let go of things is because we're having problems. And the way to improve our lives is to try to sacrifice the things that are making our lives tough and work towards things that are making our lives better. But when we sacrifice something that's making our life tough, all of our problems don't just go away. We enter a state where we really have to work. We're missing this thing that we relied on, and we're also trying to work to overcome problems that we currently have. Some of our problems that we've brought on ourselves will exist for a while. We have to work through those. So as the children of Israel left Egypt, they went into the desert. It wasn't an immediate, we got rid of it, we overthrew the tyrant. Now we're in the promised land. For a lot of us, there's a fear of moving from something very sure. So a tyrant is usually very sure. You know that force will be imposed. To a desert, something I have to work through. There's a promised land out there. It may be 40 years out there, but it's out there. And that can be scary and that can be intimidating. It's your personal responsibility message that once we take personal responsibility when we haven't before, there's going to be a difficult time. Trying to learn to do things on your own, trying to accept responsibility for poor decisions that you've made. These are tough things. It's a tough ask. And so it can be scary to throw off the tyrant, so to speak, and start to accept personal responsibility. And so I think there's a hesitancy if you've grown up in America and your life was always great. I mean, even to this day, compared to anywhere else in the world, you have things pretty good. You don't have to do a lot in order for your life to be really comfortable. We have a lot of amazing technology. We have a lot of opportunity, and it doesn't take a lot of personal responsibility to just kind of live that way. It does take personal responsibility to maintain your freedom and to stop the tyrannical impulses. You see things being taken away, you see your comfortable life being removed, and you think, well, to get it back, I have two choices. I can start taking more personal responsibility, or I can just ask a tyrant to step in and take care of things for me. The easier choice is the tyrant. But it's also, as we've discussed, that's the choice that leads to um, tyranny for everyone. And so we have to make that difficult choice and acknowledge that it will be tougher, but the result is always worth more. It's always worth the effort. Um, I think it was it Don Quixote? Yeah, Miguel de Cervantes wrote a poem in Don Quixote, which he said, "In death I fought new life to find, and help where pale distemper pined. I looked for freedom in the jail, and faith where perjuries prevail. But fate supreme, whose stern decree to sorrow matched my destiny, all possible relief withdrew, because the impossible I kept in view." He was discussing that we so often seek for uh, our desired outcome in a place where we can't find it. In death, I fought new life to find. Um, we refer back to the war in heaven because that was the setup for this life. When we look in this life and we say, I want freedom and I want peace and I want prosperity and I'm going to find it in tyranny, it won't be there. It will just bring bondage and slavery. And so we can't look to the impossible. We need to look to the principles set up in the war in heaven and that personal responsibility God's asked us to take if we're going to find that desired outcome.
Yeah, I really like that. And with that, I think to me, the piece to understand is that our desired outcome there's not this magic button. It's just, oh, we just elect the right people and all problems are solved today. We have to face the fact that life is complex. There's a crazy number of factors associated with it. And we have to be willing to take the long journey through the desert, like you say, to get to the promised land, which is a good place, the place we're hoping to be. You can't just have a Moses come in that just says, we're going to impose martial law on all you Israelites and boom, we'll be in the promised land because we're just going to make you go there. A promised land, a great society, a great country, it's only as good as its people are good. And this is one of the biggest problems with Satan's plan is that if you want heaven and you want the happiness that can come from it, you actually have to learn to work together. You have to learn to go through the long suffering of teaching truth and speaking truth and letting it permeate hearts, letting it have the time to change hearts. We're so obsessed in our culture today with instant. I want things solved today. I want it fixed now. Um, that I believe, are moving far away from truth. So if someone promises us, I'll fix that on day one, we say, sweet, let's go do it. When everything's screaming at us, this problem is way too big. There's no way to fix this in one day. Um, we have people's hearts, we have complexities, we have factors, we have all kinds of intricate decisions to be made. And here we are just believing that, well, this person will solve it all. It's not how life works. And so truth is something that we have to be willing to speak. We have to be willing to give it life time and time again. Plant seeds over and over again. Let them grow, let them develop in people. America didn't get to the place it's at today. We don't have the problems that are here today simply because someone pushed a button one day and said, oh, we're just going to change all Americans' hearts today. It takes time. And a lot of people say, oh, well, the news is so powerful, it puts out its message, or this, that, or the other. But guess what? We're powerful. We're powerful within our spheres of influence. And if we each undertook to do what's right within our own spheres of influence, we'd be just fine. Our country would be just fine. It takes time, and we have to be patient. We can't demand things today, but truth prevails. Not through force, though. Not through force, and not through executive orders. Executive order is only as good as the next 4 years, if that. These can change in a heartbeat. These aren't laws. There's no foundation. There's nothing solid about these. And as we start to rip America apart piece by piece and be like, oh, today it's this, tomorrow it's that. Oh, new order here, new order there. We're losing a critical foundation to our country. The foundation of America, the great experiment that made it work, was that there was a nation of laws and there was a system to change those laws, and that we weren't just there to willy-nilly do this, that, or the other. It was through, after a deliberative process, after it went through the representatives, the senators, that type of thing. And our hearts are radically pushing to change that. We're welcoming executive orders because we want immediate relief and solutions. But again, force will not bring changes to people's hearts. And we see this through history time and time again. The force just creates a pendulum that starts to swing. You can push and push and push it for so long, but it's a pendulum. And at some point, it comes back and it swings the other way. And you can try and use force to hold it up or to push it higher and higher and higher. But the more you do, the more loaded it becomes in its response back. And in this whiplash of society, this anger that's created, the hatred, it's a deep issue. Because again, on this seesaw, on this balance, if we're here and liberty's here in the middle, we have this balance point. We need to remember that we as a people, we can't give all our power and responsibility to a lawmaker or even to a group of lawmakers. We have to maintain things. And one of the deep concerns I have working as an attorney in America is that so many people call me on all sides of the political spectrum and they want the law to solve their problem. Something bad's happened, something went wrong, and they want the law to step in and solve it. Maybe they shirked their responsibility to get a contract in place. Maybe they shirked their responsibility to do due diligence and investigate something. Maybe the person just straight up lied to them. There's all different kinds of things that happen, but we want the law to solve it. I got injured. I had to pay some money. Solve it for me, law. And it's to the point where so many of my clients, I'll say, hey, here's the decision you need to make. And they look at me and go, I don't know how to make the decision. Just tell me what you would do. And I look at that and go, these are our personal limitations right now to give our personal responsibility to someone else. We need to make decisions for our lives. And if we don't know enough, then go learn enough. Go ask. Go be willing to pay the money to learn or to seek guidance or help. People often have this wrestle where they don't want to pay for everything they're getting. It's very common. And we want, our email to be free, but we want complete privacy protections too. And I think if we want privacy protections, why aren't we willing to pay for email that protects us? But it's this constant battle we have where the more we shirk our personal responsibility and the more we're unwilling to walk through that wilderness to get to the promised land, the more we turn to someone like Pharaoh to say, just, make us happy. And the Israelites repeatedly, the fascinating thing is they're on their journey away from Pharaoh, where they were slaves. They keep saying, it'd be better for us to be back in Egypt. We at least had certainty. Even though we were slaves, we knew what Pharaoh would give us. And that certainty can make us happy. But they weren't living by faith. They were afraid to lose one or two things they had. They were afraid of losing their riches. And this is a common fear in America. We're so afraid to lose our riches. And we forget that riches come and go all the time. God can help people earn riches. He can take riches away. Riches are won and lost. Societies, war, all these things. You can lose your house to a fire in a heartbeat. Look at what happened in California, and all the intense riches that just go up in smoke, right? And yet we so desperately hold on to it. But we need to be holding on to something deeper, and that's our own personal capacity to face any challenge that comes. The desert is a place that forces us as people to take personal responsibility for our own life. And there I am using the word force, but it puts us in a place where our only option is to take responsibility for our own life. And that's assuming we want to move forward and progress and don't just want to die there in the desert. And I think that the desert serves a place and a purpose. And here in America, we have so much wealth. We want people to solve our problems for us. And we don't want to get involved. We don't want to take a stand. We don't want to speak truth. We don't want to share these things. But it's the only way that this works out. It's the only way that liberty is maintained. We have to sacrifice. We have to walk through the desert. We have to get to a place where we look at it and say, I need to do what's right, regardless of the consequences. I need to stop giving my choices and my power to the people that are asking for it, whether it be a politician, whether it be a business owner. There's so many people that will make your life easier by making decisions for you. We need to get back to a place where we are responsible and we make those decisions for ourselves. Michael, do you have any thoughts for us as we wrap up today?
Just a quick thought. You mentioned, there's so much fear that we're not acting with faith. Frederick Bastiat said in his book, The Law, said, make a trial of liberty, which is an act of faith in God and his promises. And that really is, when we come to look at the American experience, we're making a trial of liberty, something that hadn't been done previous to this time, and it was based on faith in God. And if we cease to act with that faith, then yeah, we'll be acting on fear. We'll pursue the tyrant rather than a course of action that will take us to more freedom. So it really is comes down to that act of faith in God, that we can work together as a people to accomplish things, instead of everyone around me is my enemy and I'm just going to force them to do what I want. It really comes down to an act of faith.
Yeah. And in the war in heaven is all about living by faith, not fear. Those are the two great opposing forces. If you adopt a faith-based perspective to life, it radically changes what you see, what you feel, what you experience, how much you love life. But a fear-based perspective causes all types of issues for us, causes us to hold on, where it's so afraid to lose something, we don't want, something bad to happen. It's all this fear-based thing because we're not convinced that we can do it again. And I very firmly believe that our level of self-confidence is tied to the amount of responsibility we take. The more we take on responsibility and act, the more we start to see who we are. We're children of God. He didn't send us to this world to fail. He didn't send us to this world just to be overrun by millions of people that lack morality or whatnot. He sent us here to be agents of change, to teach. His scriptures are replete with that. The thing he teaches us over and over again is preach repentance. What does that mean? Speak truth, invite change. Tell people, use your words. That's the power you have. And as a child of God, a divine being, you have the potential to impact people and change them and their hearts. You can't force it. They have to choose it at some point. But you are a participant in that process. And as we undertake the responsibility to be involved in that process, our confidence grows. And we see more and more that we are an influence, we are an impact, we have a role and a place to play. And if we do our part, we can trust that God will do his and trust that good will prevail without force, because that opens the door to so many things that are antithetical to truth, to life, to agency. And we need to aggressively adopt and live by principles that we fought for in the war in heaven and that the war in heaven was about, and stay true to those and not resort to feeling like, oh, force is the only way. We have to go this route. So we invite you this week to think about your life and situations where you're asking other people to make decisions for you or to save you from something. What responsibility do you need to take? And will you step up and start doing it? And if you do, you will develop more confidence. You'll see more opportunities. You'll be happier as a result of taking that personal responsibility and walking into that desert some where you have to make your own decisions, where you don't have just a fallback to go back to the Pharaoh of Egypt and say, okay, I'm your slave today. But it's a wonderful life. It leads to a promised land. And it's the life that America wanted for its people. So let's continue to pursue that. Let's push for good policies and good measures that follow appropriate checks and balances and systems. And let's not turn to one person or one position to try and save us, because it will not work by doing that. So thanks for joining us today, and we will follow up with you more next week.